Hello and welcome back to World 360. When US President Joe Biden decided to ban the import of Russian oil into the US in response to the war in Ukraine earlier this month, he had bipartisan support. Both Democrats and Republicans backed their president in the hope that the move would deprive Moscow, the world's third largest oil producer, of economic resources. But now Biden finds himself facing bipartisan backlash for turning to sanctioned countries like Venezuela and Iran to replace crude oil supplies. This has also brought up a bigger question about realpolitik, which refers to politics or diplomacy that is based on practical objectives rather than on morals, ethics, or ideology. Realpolitik is about making the hard decisions that may not always appear morally right. We'll circle back to this at the end of the episode. But first, here's what happened with Venezuela. On 5th March, a group of senior US officials visited Venezuela, home to the world's largest oil reserves, to meet with the government of leftist dictator Nicolás Maduro. Resuming oil imports was reportedly on the agenda. Keep in mind that Venezuela has been sanctioned by the US on many occasions since 2014, mainly on the basis of human rights violations. And Maduro has never been viewed by Washington as a legitimate leader. This was the first high-level visit in years. After the US delegation's visit, however, Venezuela released imprisoned Americans, raising questions on whether this was quid pro quo. But the US later denied this. US lawmakers were quick to condemn the visit, with some accusing Biden of wanting to replace the oil from one murderous dictator with oil from another murderous dictator. All in all, the visit to Venezuela was risky outreach, and it would perhaps take a lot more than easing oil imports for Washington to prize away Russia's closest ally in South America. The visit could also be interpreted as a desperate move on the part of the Biden administration, as the US starts to feel the burn of sanctions against Russian oil. Just earlier this month, US gas prices climbed to their highest since 2008. Now, before we conclude, we need to talk about Iran, another country that holds abundant crude oil and natural gas reserves, which is also sanctioned by the US. However, this may change too. Since November 2021, the Biden administration, along with France, Germany, and the UK, have been trying to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, or the JCPOA. If successful, Iran would double down on its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. You may recall that in 2019, India also stopped importing oil from Iran while under pressure from the Trump government in the US. But now, with the JCPOA talks underway and the implications of the Ukraine war on global oil supply, Iran is issuing more forthcoming statements. Just last week, the country's ambassador to India said Iran is ready to meet India's energy needs. But within the US, there's been major pushback against both Venezuela and Iran. Republican senators have started floating bills that ban oil from what they call unfriendly foreign sources and urged Biden to prioritize American oil production. At the same time, Washington is getting questions from its immediate neighbor, Canada. Alberta is Canada's main oil-producing region, and recently, Alberta's energy minister asked why the US is not considering turning to its next-door neighbor instead of countries like Venezuela or Iran. So what's the big picture here? The war in Ukraine has definitely brought up tough questions for many countries, but the US is perhaps looking at the toughest question of all, whether to return to the days of realpolitik. As a Wall Street Journal article puts it, the US must decide whether to return to the final phase of the Cold War, when it held its nose to foster good relations with unsavory regimes to better confront a larger danger emanating from Russia. Often, when the topic of realpolitik in the modern era comes up, US President Richard Nixon's visit to China in the 1970s is a popular example. Nixon engaged with the communist Chinese government despite Americans' distrust of communism, as he saw it as an important tool to counter the Soviets. Now, it may not be the exact same situation we see today, but it certainly raises the question: is Biden ready to foster good relations with unsavory regimes like China to counter Russia? Thanks for watching. This is Pia Krishnankutty for ThePrint. Do subscribe to ThePrint.in and follow us on social media.